There was a big school in a country village long ago. There were 100 pupils at the school, and they used to study at night, reading aloud at the top of their voices. Sometimes, when it was too late for them to go to their homes, they used to sleep together in a big room. Late one night, they were all sleeping soundly, except the youngest boy, who was just 7 years old. He heard strange footsteps outside and pricked up his ears. Amid the loud snores of his friends, he could hear faintly, yet clearly, the voice of a woman counting the shoes outside. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on up to 100 pairs. Then, a beautiful girl quietly opened the window and crept stealthily into the room. The youngest boy was very frightened and crept silently to the furthest corner of the room. He saw the girl begin to count the pupils, starting from the doorway. She kissed each of one of them on the lips, and then, strange to say, each of them stopped breathing and died as soon as she kissed him. When she came near the corner where the youngest boy was hiding, he crept over to the opposite corner to escape from her, and there found his friends lying stiff and cold. He lay down among the dead bodies, trembling with fear and utterly horror-struck. When she reached the end, the girl turned and sighed, "Only 99? There's one missing. It is very strange." So she went outside and began to count the shoes again. 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 100 pairs. She counted them several times, from the right and from the left, so as to make absolute certain. "There is exactly 100 pairs of shoes. Let me count the boys in the room again." So she came in and counted them again, and still found only 99, for the youngest boy had succeeded in avoiding her again. In the end, she gave up and said with a sigh, "If only I could find one more, it would make 100, and I could go up to heaven. But they are one short. Whatever shall I do?" Then suddenly a rooster crowed. "Oh, I must be going," she cried, and rushed out of the room into the fields. The youngest boy was very brave, despite his tender years, and he followed her to see where she would go. She hastened to the graveyard on the mountain near the village and disappeared behind a large rock. The boy turned back towards the village, when suddenly the girl appeared in front of him again, and taking him by the hand, led him back to the rock. She seemed very glad to meet him, and taking him, patted him on the shoulder in a very friendly fashion. He sat and looked at her, wondering who could she be. Her clothes were not very clean or very neat, but she was very pretty. "Who are you?" he asked, but she smiled and made no reply. Then she embraced him and tried to kiss him on the lips, but he had realized that she could not be a real woman, but perhaps a goblin or a fox. He thought of his friends who had died of her kiss and tried to keep her away from kissing him, but in vain. Then she rolled a jewel from her mouth to his and sucked it back. She did this again and again, rolling the jewel from her mouth to his and back again, until his face gradually became pale and wan. She was absorbing human energy from him. Suddenly, the boy remembered an old belief. If a man swallows the jewel which a fox always carries on her tongue, then if, before it dissolves, he looks up at the sky, he will possess all the wisdom of heaven. And if he looks down on the ground, he will possess all the wisdom of the earth. So a plan formed in his mind, and when the jewel rolled into his mouth, he swallowed it and slipped down onto the ground. He meant first to look up at the sky and then at the ground, but the frightened girl pulled his chin down to try and get her jewel back, and so he was forced to only look at the ground. Then the boy shouted at the top of his voice to attract the attention of any of the villagers who might be passing. The girl disappeared immediately. It was still dark, though the dawn was near. There was no answer, and no one came. He fell down in a faint and lay there unconscious for some time. When he got home in the morning, his parents were greatly surprised to hear his story. The other 99 boys were lying dead, but their parents did not believe his explanation of their fate. So he decided to catch the fox that lived in the mountain graveyard, for now he knew all the wisdom of the earth. All the villagers followed him with spears and arrows. They surrounded the graveyard and searched it with great care. The boy told them to examine the rock where he had come during the night. Suddenly, a fox with 9 tails and dressed in women's clothes ran out of the cave behind the rock. They killed it on the spot. In the cave, they found a large pile of women's clothes. There were tunnels running underground into the graveyard so that the fox had been able to go and eat the bodies in the graves. It had taken the beautiful dresses from the bodies in the graves. It had taken the beautiful dresses from the women so that it could disguise itself as a pretty girl. From that day, men have possessed the wisdom of the earth, but not the wisdom of heaven. In East Asia, they say that among the long-lived creatures are the tortoise, the deer, the crane, and the fox, and that these long-lived ones attain to special states of spiritual refinement. If trees exist through long ages, they become coal. If pine resin endures it, it becomes amber. So the fox, if it lives long, while it never becomes an angel or a spiritual being, as a man does, takes on various metamorphoses and appears on earth in various forms. Yi Kuai was the son of a minister. He passed his examinations and held high office. When his father was governor of Pyongyang province, Kuai was a little boy and accompanied him. The governor's first wife being dead, Kuai's stepmother was the mistress of the home. Once, when His Excellency had gone out on an inspecting tour, the yamen was left vacant, and Kuai was there with her. In the rear garden of the official quarters was a pavilion called the Hill Pagoda that was connected by a narrow gateway with the public hall. Frequently, Kuai took one of the yamen boys with him and went there to study, and once at night, when it had grown late and the boy who accompanied him had taken his departure, the door opened suddenly and a young woman came in. Her clothes were neat and clean, and she was very pretty. Kuai looked carefully at her, but did not recognize her. She was evidently a stranger, as there was no such person among the dancing girls of the yamen. He remained looking at her, in doubt as to who she was, while she, on the other hand, took her place in the corner of the room and said nothing. "Who are you?" he asked. She merely laughed and made no reply. He called her. She came and knelt down before him, and he took her by the hand and patted her shoulder as though he greeted her favorably. The woman smiled and pretended to enjoy it. He concluded, however, that she was not a real woman, but a goblin of some kind, or perhaps a fox, and what to do he knew not. Suddenly, he decided on a plan, caught her, swung her on his back, and rushed out through the gate into the yamen quarters, where he shouted at the top of his voice for his stepmother and the servants to come. It was midnight, and all were asleep. No one replied, and no one came. The woman then, being on his back, bit him furiously at the nape of the neck. By this, he knew that she was the fox. Unable to stand the pain of it, he loosened his grasp when she jumped to the ground, made her escape, and was seen no more. What a pity that no one came to Kuai's rescue and so made sure of the beast. The former magistrate of Kwelpart, Kim Su-ik, lived inside of the south gate of Seoul. When he was young, it was his habit to study Chinese daily until late at night. Once, when feeling hungry, he called for his wife to bring him something to eat. The wife replied, "We have nothing in the house except 7 or 8 chestnuts. Shall I roast these and bring them to you?" Kim replied, "Good, bring them." The servants were asleep, and there was no one on hand to answer a call, so the wife went to the kitchen, made a fire, and cooked them herself. Kim waited, meanwhile, for her to come. After a little while, she brought them in a handbasket, cooked and ready served for him. Kim ate and enjoyed them much. Meanwhile, she sat before his desk and waited. Suddenly, the door opened, and another person entered. Kim raised his eyes to see, and there was the exact duplicate of his wife, with a basket in her hand and roasted chestnuts. As he looked at both of them beneath the light, The two women were perfect facsimiles of each other. The two also looked back and forth in alarm, saying, "What's this that's happened? Who are you?" Kim once again received the roasted nuts, laid them down, and then took firm hold of each woman, the first one by the right hand and the second by the left, holding fast till the break of day. At last the rooster crew, and the east began to lighten. The one whose right hand he held said, "Why do you hold me so? It hurts. Let me go." She shook and tugged, but Kim held all the tighter. In a little, after struggling, she fell to the floor and suddenly changed into a wild cat. Kim, in fear and surprise, let her go, and she made her escape through the door. What a pity that he did not make the beast fast for good and all. A certain scribe of Changchang province, whose name was Kim Kyung-jin, once told me the following story. He said, "In the year 1640, as I was journeying past Bighorn Bridge in Ta'in County, I saw a scholar who, with his 4 or 5 servants, had met with some accident and were all reduced to a state of unconsciousness, lying by the side of the river. I asked the reason for what had befallen them, and they at last said in reply, 'We were eating our noon meals by the side of the road when a Buddhist priest came by, a proud, arrogant fellow who refused to bow or show any recognition of us. One of the servants, indignant at this, shouted at him. The priest, however, beat him with his stick, and when the others went to help, he beat them also, so that they were completely worsted and unable to rise or walk. He then scolded the scholar, saying, 'You did not reprimand your servants for their insult to me, so I'll have to take it out of you as well.' The Buddhist gave him a number of vicious blows so that he completely collapsed, and when I looked, there was a priest a li or two ahead. Just then, a military man, aged about 40 or so, came my way. He was poor in flesh and seemed to have no strength. Riding a cadaverous pony, he came shuffling along. A boy, accompanying, carried his hat cover and bow and arrows. He arrived at the stream, and seeing the people in their plight, asked the cause. The officer was very angry and said, 'Yonder impudent priest, endowed with no end of brute force, has attacked my people and me.' 'Indeed,' said the stranger, 'I have been aware of him for a long time and have decided to rid the earth of him, but I have never had an opportunity before. Now that I have last come on him, I am determined to have satisfaction.' So he dismounted from his horse, tightened his scrip, took his bow and an arrow that had a fist head, and made a gallop after the priest. Soon he overtook him. Just as the priest looked back, the archer let fly with his arrow, which entered deep into the chest. He then dismounted, drew his sword, pierced the 2 hands of the priest, and passed a string through them, tied him to his horse's tail, and came triumphantly back to where the scholar lay, and said, 'Now do with this fellow as you please. I am going.' The scholar bowed before the archer, thanked him, asked his place of residence and name. He replied, 'My home is in the county of Kochang,' but he did not give his name. The scholar looked at the priest, and never before had he seen so powerful a giant. But now, with his chest shot through and his hands pierced, he was unable to speak. So they arose, made mincemeat of him, and went on their way rejoicing. In the Manchu War of 1636, the people of Seoul rushed off in crowds to make their escape. One party of them came suddenly upon a great force of the enemy, armed and mounted. The hills and valleys seemed full of them, and there was no possible way of escape. What to do they knew not. In the midst of their perplexity, they suddenly saw someone sitting peacefully in the main roadway just in front, underneath a pine tree, quite unconcerned. He had dismounted from his horse, which a servant held, standing close by. A screen of several yards of cotton cloth was hanging up just before him, as if to shield him from the dust of the passing army. The people who were making their escape came up to the stranger and said imploringly, "We are all doomed to die. What shall we do?" The mysterious stranger said, "Why should you die? And why are you so frightened? Sit down by me and see the barbarians go by." The people, Perceiving his mind so composed and his appearance devoid of fear, and they having no way of escape, did as he bade them and sat down. The cavalry of the enemy moved by in great numbers, killing everyone they met, not a single person escaping. But when they reached the place where the magician sat, they went by without, apparently, seeing anything. Thus they continued till the evening, when all had passed by. The stranger and the people with him sat the day through without any harm overtaking them, even though they were in the midst of the enemy's camp, as it were. At last, awaking to the fact that he was possessor of some wonderful magic, they all with one accord came and bowed before him, asking his name and his place of residence. He made no answer, however, but mounted his beautiful horse and rode swiftly away, no one being able to overtake him. The day following, the party fell in with a man who had been captured but had made his escape. They asked if he had seen anything special the day before. He said, "When I followed the barbarian army passing such and such a point," indicating the place where the magician had sat with the people, "we skirted great walls and precipitous rocks against which no one could move, and so we passed by." Thus were the few yards of cotton cloth metamorphosed before the eyes of the passers-by. There was a merchant in Chongju who used to go to Quelpart to buy seaweed. One time, when he drew up on the shore, he saw a man shuffling along the ground toward the boat. He crept nearer, and at last took hold of the side with both his hands and jumped in. "When I looked at him," said the merchant, "I found he was an old man without any legs. Astonished, I asked, saying, 'How is it, old man? Have you lost your legs?' He said in reply, 'I lost my legs on a trip once when I was shipwrecked, and a great fish bit them off.' 'However did that happen?' inquired the merchant. And the old man said, 'We were caught in a gale and driven till we touched on some island or other. Before us on the shore stood a high castle with a great gateway. The 20 or so of us who were together in the storm-tossed boat were all exhausted from cold and hunger and lying exposed. We landed and managed to get together to the house. There was in it one man only, whose height was terrible to behold, and whose chest was many spans round. His face was black, and his eyes large and rolling. His voice was like the braying of a monster donkey. Our people made motions, showing that they wanted something to eat. The man made no reply, but securely fastened the front gate. After this, he brought an armful of wood, put it in the middle of the courtyard, and there made a fire. When the fire blazed up, he rushed after us and caught a young lad, one of our company, cooked him before our eyes, pulled him to pieces, and ate him. We were all reduced to a state of horror, not knowing what to do. We gazed at each other in dismay and in stupefaction. When he had eaten his fill, he went up into a veranda and opened a jar, from which he drank some kind of spirit. After drinking it, he uttered the most gruesome and awful noises. His face grew very red, and he lay down and slept. His snorings were like the roarings of the thunder. We planned then to make our escape, and so tried to open the large gate, but one leaf was about 24 feet across, and so thick and heavy that with all our strength we could not move it. The walls, too, were 150 feet high, and so we could do nothing with them. We were like fish in a pot, beyond all possible way of escape. We held each other's hands and cried. Among us, one man thought of this plan. We had a knife, and he took it, and while the monster was drunk and asleep, decided to stab his eyes out and cut his throat. We said in reply, "We are all doomed to death anyway, let's try." And we made our way up onto the veranda and stabbed his eyes. He gave an awful roar and struck out on all sides to catch us. We rushed here and there, making our escape out of the court back into the rear garden. There were in this enclosure pigs and sheep, about 60 of them in all. There we rushed in among the pigs and sheep. He floundered about, waving his 2 arms after us, but not one of us did he get a hold of. We were all mixed up, sheep, pigs, and people. When he did catch anything, it was a sheep, and when it was not a sheep, it was a pig. So he opened the front gate to send out all the animals. We then, each of us, took a pig or sheep on the back and made straight for the gate. The monster felt each, and finding it a pig or sheep, let it go. Thus we all got out and rushed for the boat. A little later he came and sat on the bank and roared his threatenings at us. A lot of the other giants came at his call. They took steps of 30 feet or so, came racing after us, caught the boat, and made it fast. But we took axes and struck at the hands that held it, and so got free at last and out to the open sea. Again a great wind arose, and we ran onto the rocks and were all destroyed. Everyone was engulfed in the sea and drowned. I alone got hold of a piece of boat timber and lived. Then there was a horrible fish from the sea that came swimming after me and bit off my legs. At last I drifted home, and here I am. When I think of it still, my teeth are cold and my bones shiver. My 8 lucky stars are very bad, and that's why it happened to me.